No matter where you're at in your body, there are classes for you. There's always a way to dance and adapt the practice to your body. You're not adapting your body to the practice.
Welcome back to Educator University. Feeling drained from the classroom and craving a spark of creativity, today's guest shows teachers how to reclaim joy, movement, and creative energy through dance. Alexandra Beller is a celebrated choreographer, director, and educator with over 25 years of experience in dance and theater. She is the founder of Alexandra Beller Dances and the author of The Embodied Conductor and the Anatomy of Art, offering practical tools for reconnecting with creativity. Welcome, Alexandra.
Thanks for having me.
So great to have you here. I think the first thing we just want to hop into is some teachers might be listening thinking, how is dance going to help me? How can dance really support me as a teacher? Could you share a little bit about how dance could especially help teachers when it comes to relieving their stress?
Yeah, I think that I often talk to higher ed students about what they gain from taking dance, whether or not they become dancers, and how I really feel like dance is essential training ground for really anything you want to do because it's teaching you about yourself, adaptability, flow, relationship and the constancy of change. And I feel like education in so many realms has gotten disembodied. And of course, that's not teachers' faults, right? That's, I think, in large part capitalism and the way that teachers have been required to take bigger and bigger classrooms full of students and meet metrics that they didn't make up and meet rubrics that they didn't make up and, meet all these kind of outside standards. And so I feel like they're constantly reducing and cutting and uh, negotiating what they would love to do and their exploration and their flow and their um, embodiment and having students like sit down and stare ahead and and work on a screen. And then of course teachers are being required to do this too. I think teaching education used to be think tanks and meetings and invention, and unfortunately I think a lot of it gets handed to teachers now, and they don't have as much creativity. They're not allowed as much creativity and invention and certainly embodiment as they used to be able to have. So both in their classroom, in their teaching, and for their own body, mind, heart, spirit, I feel like movement in general can be an incredible both educator and rehabilitator and recovery system.
Yeah, and as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about our listeners really might have a very wide variety of exposure or experience in dance. I'm kind of curious from your perspective, because you worked with all kinds of levels. If as a teacher listening who's kind of brand new to this idea of movement and dance, what would you suggest in terms of first steps?
For themselves as a body?
Yeah,
Yeah.
themselves in terms of like embracing this all that it has to offer, like you said before. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, for one thing, I really think it's important for all of us to track our own exertion recuperation cycles. So I've mentored a lot of teachers, and one thing that I like to ask of them is when you feel especially fatigued and in a regular way, meaning like after that one third grade class, I am like in a coma for 3 hours. What is it about those particular moments in your practice, whether that's faculty meetings or particular demographic that you teach, a particular day of the week where things have hit their height? Um, what is being demanded of you in those moments, and what is the opposite of that in your body? So, for one thing, I feel like just small rituals of movement in between classes, in between teaching events, or, in the evening when you've finished that meet those dynamics. So, if you are a math teacher and you're in a lot of like direct focus, very held attention. You're trying to meet very specific, negotiation points with your students. Maybe you need a lot of open, free flow. So even something like in between classes, like shaking or looking out the window and getting a much bigger view, things like that, that feel like they have an oppositional tension to what is most exhausting to you as a teacher in your practice. That's just a first thing. Like I'm not here to say everybody needs to take a dance class after work. Dance is just one way to invite flow and movement into the body. And I don't feel especially attached to dance classes per se, but I do feel really attached to embodiment and movement as a system for self inquiry and pedagogy of all kinds of topics and forms and fields, and your own recuperation and flow. And often I find in teaching, even in teaching dance, I find that there's just a lot of controlling the body, masking the face, controlling the body, putting on a persona. Even for me, who's like a very authentic, real teacher, there's just a lot of posturing and holding and then controlling the space and controlling the energy in the room and the dynamics and the behavior, especially depending on what kind of population and age you're teaching. So finding a way to release control, find surrender, yield, pour, um, is going to be so helpful for every kind of teacher. And of course, a dance class may or may not give you that depending on the kind of dance class, right? If you take a really traditional ballet class, you're going to find you're back in control mode. If you take an authentic movement class, an improvisation, a gaga class, these are forms where you're making it up as you go along, you're responding to what's in the room, it's spontaneous and pretty free. But I have teachers who are mentorship clients of mine, and we have developed these little rituals that they do in between or after classes. One of my teachers swings on the swings in the playground when there's no recess going on because she just needs some flow and some release and abandon. And also a little bit of playing herself, and not being the one who's restricting or controlling play, but like she gets to play too. So I'm a big fan of developing physical rituals that feel right for you, as a teacher and as a human.
Yeah, and I like how you've expanded the idea of dance into just movement in general. And you mentioned also that contrasting movement, like if you're very focused in your job, maybe finding something a little more flowing, and maybe vice versa. If your job's a little bit more sporadic, maybe you want something that focuses your mind for a few minutes as well.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I've got a
Yeah.
client who teaches children who are nonverbal, who are on the spectrum and nonverbal and have a variety of, different needs in the room. And everything for her is improvisation. Like she's always just adapting inventing and adapting. So everything is about newness. So for her, that ballet class might be perfect because she wants to know exactly what's coming up next and be able to see ahead and, calculate a little bit, which she's rarely able to do in the room.
Yeah, yeah, I think kind of flowing the conversation in that direction is if there's someone's listening right now, they're thinking, okay, I'm interested maybe in actually doing some actual dance, and you have so much experience in kind of the different things that are available. Maybe they're interested in even doing a class. Maybe they're thinking, I want to maybe even move in that direction. And you mentioned kind of maybe finding something that contrasts what you're already doing, like kind of figuring that out. How could you help someone maybe figure out which class would be the best place to start with dance?
Yeah, I would say that if you are looking for more spontaneity, personal expression, free flow, invention, if that feels like that pulls against what you've been doing, you've maybe been doing more strategic, focused, controlled, methodical material, and you want a little more play, something that is built on improvisation. So that might include something like five rhythms or ecstatic dance, authentic movement, gaga, contact improvisation. And you could look around in your town. I mean, first of all, there's lots online. So even if you're in a place that's a bit smaller or doesn't have as, thriving artistic offerings, you can find lots online. And then you can look in your community and look at the local dance studios and just look at their schedule and see what they offer. You could certainly call up. They're always happy at a dance studio to tell you about different classes. And you could say, I'm an adult beginner or I've been away from dance for 30 years, or whatever your situation is. I'm a yogi and really athletic, but I've never danced, or I'm recovering from 2 hip surgeries and I'm just starting to walk again. But no matter where you're at in your body, there are classes for you. And any teacher that I would fall in love with would invite anybody at any stage to an open class. Maybe not to an advanced professional level class, because they want everyone to stay safe, but would, invite you to come and adapt your body, adapt the practice to your body. So, that includes if you are in a wheelchair, or, don't have all your appendages, like there's always a way to dance and adapt the practice to your body. You're not adapting your body to the practice, you're adapting the practice to your body. And any teacher that I would fall in love with would want you to do that and know how to help you do that.
Yeah. What about things like, tap dance or jazz? Is that something that would be something that do they still offer that in, like, studios at all? I don't know. When I was a little kid, I did that when I was
Absolutely.
small. Yeah.
Absolutely. I feel like for me that those are more like structured forms. So for me, that would pull against somebody who's constantly in invention mode. That might be like
Mm.
I teach preschool, I teach in an integrated classroom where lots of different things happen all the time. I teach like differently abled students, and like I can never predict what's coming up minute to minute. And I want something that's got lots of form and structure. Absolutely. Something like jazz dance. Of course, you could go in the like less artistic realm, a yoga, a gyrotonic class, something like that, that sort of bridges, dance adjacent, but not necessarily dance. Certain modern techniques are much more structured, things like Horton, Moan, Cunningham. Those techniques are have a lot more structure to them. And then somewhere in between the more structural techniques, and of course you've got ballet in there, and these more improvisational are things where the body and the spirit and the music and the form are all like forming an ecosystem. So a lot of diasporic dances are less about meeting an outside metric, your foot goes here and your shape should look like this, and more about following a certain kind of flow. And more contemporary modern practices, what I teach, which is called Bartenia fundamentals. A lot of different diasporic traditions, West African dance, um, etc., have more spaciousness. It's like on the spectrum from like, we're going to tell you what to do and how to look, to absolutely anything goes. Somewhere in the middle of that spectrum are these forms where I feel like there's a little bit more, yeah, there is an absolute form. And then there's also me as a very unique individual, and we're having this conversation together.
There really is kind of a wide range when it comes to the expression in dance because you have, like I said, the more structured and then the more free flowing things. So when they're choosing, they can choose from maybe one of the on that spectrum somewhere. Yeah. And you kind of mentioned it, but briefly, dance is not just physical, but it's also an emotional and mental experience as well. Could you share a little bit about how dance could help a teacher maybe reconnect with joy or self-expression in a new way for them?
Yeah. Well, again, I'll go back to that kind of body mind separation, which, has roots very far back. I think, therefore, I am. And a lot of society conditions us to believe that the mind is really the driver and the body is like a car. But it's not true. The body is how we receive and express in the world. And we rarely pay enough attention to the things that the body has to say that maybe don't always get up to the level of consciousness. And you, one of the things that I do in my career is I um, analyze body movement for meaning in a lot of different fields and capacities, partly for actors. And so, a certain posture, and this intuitively, you'll watch somebody and you're making up a story about them based on how they hold themselves, how they walk, how they sit, how they reach out, how they gesture. You're making up a story about that. And part of that story includes like, can I trust you? Are you safe? What can I expect from you? And plenty of other associations that are going to, feed into this storytelling. And of course, we can't control that story and we shouldn't try, but we can shape a little bit how we are offering ourselves to the world. So if I want to be a safe space for my students, but I walk in and my shoulders are hiked up to my ears and I've got all this tension in my neck and my head's not really moving on my spine, part of them is going to be on alert, right? It's just an animal response system. When we look at an animal and they look like they're a bit of a threat, we'll go on alert. And so, partly for our students, but of course, that tension in that neck and shoulders also is what's giving us migraines, is causing insomnia, is giving us brain fog, is causing us neck and shoulder pain, maybe shooting pain down the arm, etc. Like those pains in the body and the lack of freedom that we have in the body sometimes inhibits our relationships with ourselves and our relationships with our students.
Yeah, that movement is not just about dance, it's also about the way we hold ourselves too physically and creating that space and space for ourselves and our students. Yeah, you kind of mentioned this in the idea of dance about embodying creativity with kind of movement. I'm kind of curious how teachers can tap into that creativity with throughout their day. That would allow them to, like you mentioned, kind of briefly, kind of that idea of someone singing on the swing set or something like that. But are there other ideas, little movements they can make throughout the day that would really empower them to like, tap into creativity with their bodies, like you said, their movements?
Yeah, well, for one thing, I think I'm going to take away almost. I believe that any practice or modality can be expanded upon by using movement in the classroom. So there's two things we can talk about, like your actual teaching and then what you do for yourself in between teaching. So for sure, in between teaching, something like what we call authentic movement, which is essentially um, often with your eyes closed, but of course, in a space that's big enough, you're not going to bump into your couch. Um, you simply move exactly how your body is moving and you let yourself gesture, and there's no music. You're not trying to express anything. You're not trying to be pretty. You're not trying to meet any kind of standard. You're literally just letting your body speak like a stream of consciousness. So similar to what the morning pages do, if anybody's read The Artist's Way, and like, okay, 3 pages, just write nonstop, don't stop writing. And, you feel like you're writing nothing. This doesn't mean anything. All of a sudden, some big idea comes out. You're kind of surprised yourself. The body does the same thing. So, 3 minutes of authentic movement or nonstop. And nonstop doesn't mean your body's always moving. It means you're not stopping the feeling process. So you might be in authentic movement and be in relative stillness for 2 of the 3 minutes. That's not what I mean by not nonstop, right? Just like when you're writing, you might be like, I am writing, I'm writing, I'm writing, I'm writing, I'm writing. I don't know what I'm saying. That might be the moment when you're waiting for more movement to come. So authentic movement as a practice for the teacher's body and humanity and bringing them back into self is a beautiful thing. Of course, you want to make sure that you're in a safe space, and that means a space where you don't feel like you need to impress or be concerned with anybody. You don't have other eyes on you. You're not worried you're going to be interrupted or anyone's going to make fun of you. So it's not something I would do in front of your eighth grade class. Um, but the other thing is like what you do in class. And I'm a huge proponent of bringing movement into the class, whether it's simply like freeing up your body a bit as you teach, starting to walk around the classroom a little bit more, um, uh, playing charades for the directions, like doing something that's physical. Um, and I'm a big fan of like developing gestural vocabulary for um, translation purposes. So translating written language into movement and movement into spoken language and spoken language into a drawing. And so I'm a big fan of translating ideas from form to form and letting the body be one of those spaces that it can move through.
Yeah, I like that idea of using your movement, especially kids, they love to move. Younger ones love to move a lot, and so getting them moving, getting them as part of the learning is a great piece. Going back to that authentic movement, I did have a question. Does that include like 3 minutes? Is there music behind when you're doing this, or do you just do it to like silence?
Ideally, no, because you're not trying to match anything from the outside.
Okay.
I would say that if somebody feels absolutely shut down about the idea of doing it and they just feel like, I've got to have some music on to get myself feeling less embarrassed and more open, you could put something on. But ideally, the person who has the microphone is your body. And
Mm,
when there's music playing, your body's song is always going to try to sing with what's already happening. And ideally, your body is the real soloist in the room and is not decorating or acting out or visualizing somebody else's feeling, but is really just able to take some time to have the microphone. So ideally, no music.
mhm.
But if it's a choice between I don't move at all or I have a little dance party in between classes and I have my headphones and I move around my classroom and I free myself up, I would totally choose that over nothing. But if we're talking about real authentic movement, it's hopefully a time for your body to speak freely and not try to match anything from the outside.
Yeah, this is a really new concept for me, so I'm just trying to wrap my head around it a little bit. For teachers listening to me, maybe they're kind of this is new for them. So, like, after you did, someone would do this 3 minutes of authentic movement. What is the goal, or what would happen? Like, is there things you're learning about yourself, how you move? Is that going to tell you things about yourself, or how does that exactly work?
Yeah, I mean, often I find when I do it that there will be either a theme or a couple gestures or a couple moments that I somehow remember from after, I remember after it's over. And I'm like, "Oh, I was, like, doing this thing where I was, like, grabbing, like, there was a lot of grabbing. What was that?" And I'll think about it, the way you might think about a dream or, like, "Yeah, I was stuck in this cabin in the woods. I wonder what that dream was about." And, in that same kinda energy, you're like, "I wonder what that pulling was about." Yeah, there was this one moment I just, like, dropped to my knees. I actually remember feeling really sad. Wonder what that was. And you're not necessarily looking for like a one to one. I think that I was sad because my partner said this to me last night, but just like, yeah, I was fragile. I was feeling really young in that moment. That was interesting. And you're not looking for a diagnosis or, really specific answers, but the body absolutely holds information that the conscious mind does not have access to. And so, what authentic movement does, again, similar to morning pages, the way you'll write something and you're like, "Oh, I didn't realize I was feeling that way." But then it just comes out, you see it on the paper. And the same thing happens with your body. Things just appear in the room. So after it's over, in traditional authentic movement, you actually have another person in the room with you and they're watching you. And they're both keeping you safe, like you're not going to hit a wall or a chair or anything. And they also are able to reflect back what they noticed and also hear you and receive, and when I'm the witness for somebody that's doing authentic movement, I always want to hear what they experienced first. And then, I'll reflect back like, yeah, you seemed like you were like up and down and up and down and up and down. There was a lot of like getting into and getting out of the floor. You almost looked like you were practicing um ascending and descending. Do you remember that? And, often I can put something together from something they said. So probably don't have a witness in this particular situation, but there's also a sense in authentic movement that you're always in part your own witness. And it's not being self
Yeah.
conscious. It's just that part of you is like in total intuition mode, and part of you is tracking what came out of that, in this way. Like, oh, there was all this grabbing, or I ended up in fetal curl, just like rocking. That was interesting.
Yeah, a lot of self-discovery and maybe even self-validation for what you're feeling is kinda what that you're saying this kinda brings up in you.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Taking down the mask, getting real.
This is something that might make I think that just listening to you, I'm thinking teachers might think, "Wow, this is, like, really raw and real." Do you feel like when you work with clients, they feel the sense of like, "Whoa," like, "Oh my gosh, like, am I gonna really move my arms around and like, be authentic?" Like, authentic is a really strong word for this. Do you find that this is a challenge for some people, or especially teachers or people who are in professions our job's very much like, sit here and be the authority of everything. So I'm curious what you've experienced with your clients.
I mean, I do feel like the people that specifically seek me out feel really ready and excited for the challenge of pretty radical authenticity, just because that is where I begin. That doesn't mean that they're not scared. I think everybody, including myself, when we do truly authentic practices, it's scary because that's really you. And if that part of you gets rejected or, abandoned, that feels terrifying, right? Um, but it's also such a treasure trove of all of your parts and your depth and not your veneer and what you've, built and created and shaped and postured, but like real feelings. And I am such a fan of being able to be as real as possible in as many situations as possible because for me, especially, starting to hit my leader part of my life, I am noticing that it feels like the only way forward. It definitely was something that happened for me in menopause. Just like, yeah, I just can't meet all of these outside metrics anymore. I can't bring myself to care about it or them. And I need practices that help me let go and prune my attachment to be this shape, be this whatever, whether it's beauty standards or the way we walk into a room or trying to control the way people think about us. I find I can't do that anymore. And I have noticed my teaching has gotten better and better in my ability to really see students as they are and adapt to them and work with them as they are in the moment and let my material adapt to the room and the vibe and the humans that I'm working with has gotten stronger and stronger the more I've put down the masks.
Yes, it's powerful to hear your story because you are a teacher just like we are in different ways, but still a teacher. And so it's empowering to hear that finding our stride is also important for us to see our students. Like you said, you've been able to see them in a new way as well, because I think seeing ourselves helps with that whole process. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, well, one of my biggest, teaching revelations was when I was a younger teacher and I was teaching dance classes, I felt like, yeah, you have to walk in the room, you have to leave it at the door, your tiredness, what's going on in your life, what you feel in your body, your aches and pains, they're not important in the classroom. What you need is not important in the classroom. You're there to serve and serve these people, and you kind of have to shut it down. And that was my early teaching belief system. And over the years, especially dealing with some pretty serious body traumas that I had, I was paralyzed on one leg and um, a bunch of other things. Um, I stopped being able to really do that very functionally. And I had to let myself enter the room. And I noticed that when I was more real, when I walked into the room, including like, yeah, we sit in a circle. I take everybody's, social, emotional, physical temperature. How are you doing today? What's going on? But I also give mine. And I'll say, yeah, I'm feeling burned out and tired today. I'm excited to be here and I'm feeling tired. And I do like to talk about like allowing our tiredness or grief or anxiety or whatever, like allowing it to be true for us when we walk in the room. It doesn't mean we're going to let it rule class. It doesn't mean we're going to overshare with students, especially not, certain demographics. I mean, I teach predominantly adults, so I can be a little bit more honest out loud, but being honest with myself and letting it be part of my experience in the room has made me a much more empathetic and embodied and available and porous teacher. Because if I'm like, okay, here we go, and I'm buttoned up and I'm shut down, I can't feel anybody else by watching them. When I'm like grounded and I'm in flow and I'm breathing and I can feel myself, then I'm like, ooh, that kid looks tight and that kid looks bored and that person looks, I'm not sure what's going on. They look a little gone, disassociated, right? And I can feel it in my body. And then I can be like, that hey, will you show some, and I can say, like, you get up and show something to the bored one. And to the tired one, I can, stay a little bit closer. And to the dissociated one, I might ask them a direct question. And so, like, I can respond to the needs that I see in the room because I can feel them in my body because my body is awake and alive and is allowed to be fully in the room.
Yeah, and it's really about almost being present and taking, like you said, taking inventory of yourself so you can really be present for the people that the students you're having in your class. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I'm kind of curious, kind of what encouragement you'd give to teachers who are listening right now and they're thinking, okay, maybe I'll try this authentic dance, like no one's looking or whatever, or maybe I'll try a dance class. And where they're just kind of like they just want to dip their toe in the water and I'm kind of curious any final advice you'd give to them to kind of push them into like, go ahead and try this. Go ahead and do this if you want to.
Well, for one thing, I really wish that it had not taken me until menopause to feel like, you know what? If somebody wants to take the time to judge me or make fun of me or think something about me, it's such a boring use of my time to care about it. So that's one thing is that I know that uh, on the outside of it, it can seem like, oh, it's going to be embarrassing. But I also feel like embarrassed about what? Like, who, first of all, in my experience, except when you're teaching like eighth graders and them to each other, nobody in a dance class is judging you. Everybody is concerned with their own body, their own expression, trying to get the instructions into their body, trying to remember the phrase if there's a phrase, responding to the music. Nobody has time to look around and be like, "You're not a very good dancer," or y y "Your, thighs are big," or whatever we think we're worried about somebody thinking about us. Historically, in my experience, they're not. Nobody is thinking anything. They are feeling often the same way you are, which is like, "Oh, I'm worried. I'm embarrassed. I feel shy. I'm worried somebody's gonna judge me." And it's just such a kind of sad irony to me that, like, all of these people that would, like, be so fed by just saying, "Oh, you know what? Screw it. I'm gonna show up and I'm gonna be real and I'm gonna move and I'm gonna have an experience and I don't really care what anybody thinks about me. I'm just gonna be myself and get to know myself and have some joy and play." And all of these people who need the exact same thing are all simultaneously stopping themselves from doing it because they're all making up something that somebody else in the room is thinking about them, which is not true. And all of these people are doing it at the same time. And I'm like, oh, I just want to like go in and say, please stop. Please just like stop. Everybody, and like everybody wants that in the classroom. So one thing is it's mostly in your head. Whatever you're worried about, you're judging yourself, it's in your head. And I think I've never seen anybody take a risk about being, you know, dorky or, you know, um, doing something that they think is embarrassing. I've never seen anybody take that risk and not feel better after and not get rewarded for it as an adult. Yeah, it happens to us in middle school, right? And that traumatizes a lot of people, and I totally get it. But it's our job to actively recover from that trauma by stepping up to that moment and saying, yeah, sure, I danced once in middle school and all these people made fun of me and I got bullied and I felt really shy and ashamed and I shut down and I never danced again. And I totally get that. And I'm not saying those feelings aren't real, but they're not just going to go away. It's our job to say, but you know what? I'm an adult now and I really don't give a flying fig what other people think about me. I'm going to show up and I'm going to be free and it's my body and it's my life and it's my expression. And if some Dorcas wants to judge me in a dance class, they can have at it. I really don't care. I'm going to have my experience and it's going to be joyful. And we really need to prioritize play and joy and rest in our lives as adults because there's just too much that's hard and grinding. That moment when you stop yourself because you're shy, I just feel like, holding that person with both hands on looking at them in the eyes and saying, "Hey, like, why? What's the worst thing that could happen here?" And, how likely do you think it is that that thing's going to happen? Do you think that the dance teacher that you showed up for is going to judge you? Do you think that all these other people who are worried about what everybody else thinks about them, do you think they're judging? Like, they're not, which doesn't make it go away, but it can help to be like, okay, realistically, nobody's doing the thing that I'm afraid of. It's really me that's judging me. So maybe I could just take a back seat.
Yes, I love that message. It's very powerful. I think not just for dance, but for anything that our listeners are thinking, okay, I want to try something new. Like you said, whether dance is a great part of that, a great opportunity option, but just anything like why are we letting someone else's or our own opinion hold us back from doing what we really love? So what a great message. Yeah. Are there any final thoughts that you want to share with teachers that you haven't quite covered yet, we haven't covered in this podcast?
There's one more thing that I think is a really nice Venn diagram with dance and movement in general, which is the relationship between planning and improvising, which is very much like the difference between doing choreography, which is set movement, and improvisation, which is spontaneously invented movement. And for me as a teacher, I've really, for the most part, stopped over planning classes because I find it makes me less responsive and inventive and creative in the room. Now, of course, you need to know what your content is and you need to know who you're teaching. And, if you have goals or learning outcomes, of course, we're not abandoning any of that. We're not like anything goes. And at the same time, in my experience, if I am grounded enough in the content that I'm teaching, I know that today I'm teaching XYZ and that the learning goals are ABC and that the demographic are these people and I suspect they have these needs. But then I go in and I have some kind of plan, but I no longer like plan moment to moment what's happening because I find I'm a much better teacher when I'm able to be more spontaneous. So that's the other thing is like if you want to become more of a planner, you could take more of a planned class where you're learning really set vocabulary and something like you mentioned, tap and jazz and more traditional modern techniques or ballet. Those are going to do that kind of thing. If you want to be more of a spontaneous teacher, you might take classes where you are inventing. And that would include stuff like authentic movement and gaga and contact improvisation and five rhythms and ecstatic dance, that kind of thing. And then there's stuff in between where there is a lot of flow and you're playing with rhythm, including potentially polyrhythms and syncopation. And, do you want to play with rhythm and time or do you want to play with weight and flow? Like figuring out what you need in your body and your system and your nervous system is going to help you decide what class to take if you decide to take some kind of set practice. But those can also be things that we play with in how much planning or improvisation we do in the classroom.
Yeah, that idea of choreographed and more free can apply to our teaching as well. That's a very, like, kind of universal thing, actually, not it goes beyond dance. I like that you finish that off with that, yeah. We have some, fun quick questions before I ask where the audience can find you. You can answer them in, like, a sentence or a word, however fast or slow you wanna answer them. The first question here is your favorite teacher lunch?
Ooh, I'm a big fan of the like hodgepodge lunch, like a little pile of grapes and a little bag of Triscuits and a little thing of cheddar cheese and, tiny little square of chocolate. So I'm a little like nibbler. I'm not great at like a sandwich or like a thermos of stew. So I like being able to have like, I'm going to go have one grape or a piece of cheese and cracker. So modular.
Yes, I think it makes sense with dancing too, because you don't wanna be super heavy when you're moving around and everything, so that makes a lot of sense. Your best behavior management or emotional regulation tip?
For myself or for students.
I was thinking for students, but also if you have something for yourself, that would work too, yeah.
Um, I often will name what I'm feeling with students. So, like, I was just teaching a residency, and they were just so dull and tired and not giving anything back, and I was, like, cheerleading, and I finally just said, "This is what I see in you. Tell me what's happening." So, like, naming it and asking a question and then asking them what would solve it is often my little trifecta of, "I'm gonna tell you what is happening." I might even say what it is happening to me because of it. I'm gonna ask you what's happening, and then I'm gonna ask you what your solutions would be. So, like, they said, "We need a dance party," and I was like, "Let's have a dance party, and let's work on this particular principle we've been working on already inside the dance party."
Yeah, really being responsive to what the needs of your students are. It's definitely a great management tool there. Teacher that made a difference in your life.
Mm. Jackie Villamil was a ballet teacher. I think I was 16 years old. I was at an adult dance festival, Bates Dance Festival, and I had gotten a lot of criticism and rejection from the whole dance world because I didn't have a body type that was a traditional dancer's body. I was bigger than what they thought I should look like. And I felt so sure that I had something really special in me that would come out in dance, and I felt like nobody had ever seen it, and she just saw it. She came up to me after class one day and she was like, you know that you're extraordinary, right? Like, you know that you're so special." And I was like, "No." And she was like, "Well, you better." And that really changed
Aw.
something for me.
Yeah, it just takes one person sometimes to just tell you that and to believe it. Yeah, I love that. Last question here is for quick questions is last lesson you taught.
Oh, what's the last lesson I taught? I was teaching yesterday, and we were talking about inner consent. So we talk a lot about like other people's access to our bodies, but the lesson was about how to shift our own tempo so that we are meeting our own consent, because we often push ourselves and drag ourselves around and actually are not listening to ourselves in a way that we would not accept from another person if they did it to us, but we do it to
Mm.
ourselves. So the lesson was in trying to listen for inner consent, and that often meant slowing down for us.
Yes, an important lesson for sure. Well, Alexandra, thank you so much for coming on and sharing so much about your experience and knowledge of dance with teachers today. I know we've learned so much and gotten so much value. Where can my audience find you? And I'll also link it right below this video in the description.
I have a very prolific website that's got a lot of stuff on it and some free classes and essays and goodies, including material about teaching, and that's alexandrabellerdances.org.
Thank you. And again, I'll link it right below for you guys to click on if you're interested in learning more about Alexandra's dance. Thank you again for being on. I look forward to the comments to hear if anyone tries some of these new techniques and starts moving their body in new ways.
Me too.